In this video, we're going to go over the bare minimum. This is the absolute essentials and nothing more that you need to properly film a sports game. We're going to talk about different sports and different scenarios you may find yourself in based on the sport that you're filming. And I'm going to give you gear from the camera to the lenses to the audio to like all these other little things you don't even think about that you might need to properly capture the sports game that you're going to. Hey, what's going on? My name is Peter Sorellis. I'm a videographer and editor from Ottawa. I specialize in sports videography and have been filming sports for 5 or 6 years now professionally, from like basketball to football to hockey now. Usually when I go to film a sports game, I bring a lot of equipment, but you don't actually need a lot of equipment. You can kind of get things done with very little. And it's nice sometimes to have less equipment because instead of focusing on all your gear, you can spend your attention on the actual game and capturing those moments and like being invested in what's happening in front of you, which I think is how you should be approaching capturing sports most of the time. So I'm going to go over my bare minimum equipment. Now, I don't want you to take like the actual specific gear from this. I'm just going to speak from my experience and what I've used and reference like cameras and lenses and stuff that I've used over the years. If you're like in a different camera ecosystem, like just apply this and like the general concepts of it to whatever gear you're using and go get it done with that. Like the gear doesn't matter as much as far as the specifics. So the first thing I want to talk about is camera bodies. And I think that it's really important when you're going to film sports to have one good, reliable camera body. For me, that camera body is the FX3. And if money is no object to you, then I think that the FX3 is the best camera you can have for capturing sports videos until you get into like the ultra expensive cinema range. Like even better than the FX6 and the FX9. The FX3 is just really, really good. It's the best combination of like features and form factor and all that stuff. But if you're just starting looking for the bare minimum, the FX3 is not your bare minimum camera. If you're filming a sport like football or soccer, where you're outside and the lighting is pretty good, maybe it's daytime, you just have daylight coming in, I think that like an affordable crop sensor camera body is the way for you to go. The FX30 is a really good one. It might still be a little bit expensive for like bare minimum. You might even be able to go cheaper, like an A6500 from Sony or something like that, if you want to get a camera that you can like just start out with. But like when lighting is ideal, those crop sensor camera bodies are going to be really good because they give you extra reach that you need for field sports like football and soccer when you're using like lenses that aren't super telephoto, and they keep more of your frame in focus, so there's a less shallow depth of field, which when you're at longer focal lengths is kind of okay because you're getting a lot of depth of field from your lens. So you can shoot on a sensor that gives you less separation from your background because it'll actually make it easier for you to keep your subject in focus. If you're going to be shooting in an environment where lighting isn't as good, so maybe you're filming at night on a field where the lights aren't very good, or you're filming inside and you're filming a sport like basketball, then you're probably going to want a full frame camera just because the full frame sensor is going to help you get more light into your image and it'll make your images look better than if you're using a crop sensor camera where maybe you can't expose your image properly based on the lighting in your environment. If you want to get a full frame camera and you don't want to break the bank, because obviously FX3 is not for everyone, then like I think your best bet is to go to one of the older full frame cameras. Like you can pick up a Sony a7 III used now. That camera is pretty old and obviously it's been iterated upon. Like the a7 IV is now a thing and has been for a while. The Sony a7 III can still produce some really good looking images. I used it for a long time and it was really good. It gives you good background separation, and like when you're filming a sport like basketball or hockey or something, you're not using lenses that are as telephoto as when you're filming a field sport like football or soccer. And so you're not getting as much natural separation from your background from the focal length that you're using. And so having your sensor provide a little bit more separation from the background in those situations is actually a lot more helpful, and the combination of the extra separation and shallow depth of field along with the extra light is a good one to have for indoor sports where the lighting isn't as good and your subjects aren't as far away from you. Now let's talk lenses. Usually when I go to film sports, I bring one mid-range zoom lens and that lens stays on my camera pretty much the entire time. When I'm going to film an outdoor sport like soccer or football, that might be a 70 to 200 because I know my subject isn't going to be coming that close to me. Most of the time I'll be filming people who are very far away. But when I'm filming a sport indoors like basketball or hockey, that lens is usually the Tamron 35 to 150 because At 35 mil, you can get pretty wide when people get close to you, and at 150 mil, you can film subjects that are quite far away. Even if you use this lens on a crop sensor camera, like what we talked about earlier, you'd probably be able to film a field sport with it as long as you do a little bit of running around, and you'd be just fine. But this lens is also expensive, and I don't think it's your bare minimum. I think your bare minimum, if you look for a lens that you can film an indoor sport with, is something like the Tamron 28 to 75 millimeter f2.8 lens. There's two versions of this lens, and if you can find the earlier version that doesn't have the custom function buttons and stuff on it online used, you can get it pretty cheap, and even the newer version of this lens is not that expensive, like relative to what lenses cost. So this could be worth picking up as like your baseline lens if you're filming indoor sports or sports where your subjects are closer to you. And if you're filming outdoor sports, there's a lot of telephoto options that have variable apertures that are pretty affordable. If you get one of these telephoto lenses that have a variable aperture, then you can stop that lens down. So let's say you have an f4.5 to 5.6 variable aperture lens. You can shoot it at f5.6 throughout. That way you don't have like weird changing in exposure when you're zooming in and out and shooting at different focal lengths, and your images look consistent. But you can actually film your subjects who are really far away and not need to worry about like running all over the place to get a half decent shot of anyone. And so that's probably how I would go about it, especially if you have a crop sensor camera. Now, as for audio, like technically you don't need an on-camera microphone. You could get away with just filming visuals, but I think that audio is a really important part of video, and to hear the natural sound of the crowd pop off when somebody scores, or like sticks hitting the ice or shoes squeaking on the court, I think that's really important, and that natural audio is just valuable to have. So I would recommend, at the very least, because it's affordable, getting a cheap on-camera microphone like the Deity D4, I believe, is one that's pretty affordable, or the Rode Video Micro is one that I've used before, and it'll at least get you better sounding audio than what is captured by your on-camera microphone. And if these microphones were like $300, $400, I wouldn't be recommending this as an essentials, but we're talking like $50 here, maybe $60. And so I think it's worth considering picking one of those up. What you don't necessarily need to pick up as an essential is a monitor. I like filming sports with an external monitor, and most people do, because camera monitors like on these mirrorless cameras are not very big. But if you're just trying to get by and looking for the essentials, an external monitor should not be near the top of your list. Like, it is annoying looking at your videos on the little LCD screen. But if you're filming with autofocus and you're using like the touch tracking features, although it's a little bit annoying, your image isn't going to look worse necessarily if you monitor it on your camera monitor versus an external one. So I would say to start, if you don't have the money for it, or you don't want to invest in it and make your rig all complicated, just don't worry about getting an external monitor at the beginning. Focus on other things, and then you can just buy that when you want to and invest the amount of money that you actually are interested in investing into that type of thing. What is essential though is memory cards. You need to have fast memory cards to film sports, and that's just a non-negotiable, especially if you're using a newer camera. If you can't record the type of files that your camera records because your memory cards aren't fast enough, then you aren't getting any videos, and your game is not going to go well. You're going to be very frustrated on the sidelines, and your videos actually aren't going to look as good as they could when you have to shoot a lower resolution or a lower bit rate because your memory cards can't keep up. So I use SanDisk V90 SD cards to film my games. I'll usually keep 2 of them on me, like a 128 gigabyte size, so that I have like about 250 gigs worth of storage at any given time. And I usually end up filling one card and not filling the other one if I shoot a full game with warm-ups and press conferences after the fact for like a basketball game or a hockey game. Or if I'm filming football, I might even run through 2 full cards with like pre-game stuff and post-game stuff and the full length of the game, just because the games are so long. And so I think that like around 250 gigs of good, fast, usable memory is like your minimum. This is where you should be putting money in, because all your video files are going onto these cards, and if your cards are cheap or slow or you don't have enough, you actually aren't going to be able to film. So having good, reliable memory cards is important. I also use Lexar cards from my work. Same thing, 128 gigabytes, V90 cards, so like 300 megabits a second speeds. And those work great. Now, if you're using an older camera, like I suggested the A7 III as a good full frame starter camera if you're just trying to get into this type of thing and film sports in a more cinematic way. You don't need V90 cards for that type of camera because you're filming 8-bit footage, not 10-bit footage, and it just like doesn't write to your cards as fast and doesn't take up as much space. So you can use slower cards. But if you're filming on an FX3, an FX30, or any modern mirrorless camera that's come out in like the past 4 or 5 years really, you're gonna need cards at this speed. And unfortunately they're expensive, but they are actually worthwhile to have. Now, something that I'm always worried about happening at games is something not working, whether a lens breaks or a camera malfunctions. It's always important to have backups. And so I always try to bring a backup camera, and I don't bring a backup camera that's necessarily as good as my main camera, or at least I wouldn't if I was just starting. And the same applies for lenses. In the situation I described earlier, if you're bringing a Sony A7 III as your main camera, maybe throw like an A6300 in your bag as your backup camera. So that if your main camera breaks, like it gets dropped or it malfunctions or something, you have a backup camera that, although isn't quite as good, can at least get the job done. And even though 90% of the time you're not going to use it, it will give you peace of mind, which is super important to have because when you're in the field, you can't just get a second camera if you didn't pack one in your bag. So if I'm packing like this Tamron 35 to 150 millimeter lens as my main lens for the game, I might also throw the 70 to 200 or the Tamron 28 to 75 in my bag as another option, like as a complementary lens that I could use to get a different look if I want, but also as a lens that can serve as a backup in case this one breaks and still get the job done on its own. You don't need to spend a lot of money on your backups when you're first starting. Like if your backup is a point and shoot, keep it on you, because if your camera breaks, finishing the job with a point and shoot camera is better than not finishing the job at all. And then bring a ton of batteries. When I shoot a game, I run off a V-mount battery and that powers everything. And then I have 3 other Sony batteries in my bag that I can swap in when I need. And I have 2 additional batteries that can just power my monitor independently so that I'm always good for batteries no matter what. But if you're just starting and you just want the essentials, then a V-mount setup is probably not what you're doing. So I would recommend bring like 4 to 5 batteries. I don't like even thinking about charging anything when I go to film a game. I want to just go and not worry about power and then figure out charging when I get home. I recommend you do the same and approach sports filming with like the same mindset because there's already enough happening at a sports game. You do not need to worry about batteries. So bring like 4 or 5 batteries for your camera and just know that whenever one gets below like 25% charge, you can just swap it out and you don't need to worry about ever running out of battery while you're filming a clip. That's going to help you focus on the game and not on your gear, which is kind of the theme for like this whole video and like what you should be looking to do when you're building out your first kit, is not building a kit that's gonna distract you, but rather is gonna enable you to film the best videos possible. So if you liked this video and found it helpful, please subscribe to the channel because I post videography and video editing tips and tutorial videos similar to this one on a regular basis, and I would love to have you around for that. If you have any questions, please drop them down in the comment section. I'd love to chat with you down there, and that's going to be all for this one. So until next time, peace.